I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, Madam Sigrid Kaag, as well as the Executive Director of UNOPS, Mr. Moreira da Silva, for their briefings on the situation in the Strip and their efforts to ensure humanitarian access to its territory as part of the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2720. Unfortunately, as we warned, without a full-fledged ceasefire in Gaza, this document has essentially remained dead letter. In today's statement of the senior coordinator confirms this, although we understand that Madam Kaag was very careful in choosing her words. For today, if any United Nations official takes the liberty of providing a frank assessment of Israelis' actions, they are immediately inscribed on the Israeli entry to the Gaza Strip, and their efforts are obstructed. However, the Security Council has been working in a different paradigm, and it has an obligation, a real obligation, to call a spade a spade. The humanitarian situation in the Palestinian enclave is horrific, and the reason for this is the ongoing Israeli military operation, which Israel has been carrying out without any regard for international humanitarian law or the resolutions and decisions of the United Nations Security Council. Such arrogance emanates from the unconditional support for any of its actions by the United States, which has for nearly a year now been blocking any hint of a substantive reaction from our resolution from the Security Council. And the number of the dead Palestinian civilians as a result of Israeli bombings, armed raids, and ground military operations has exceeded 42,000. At least 100,000 have been wounded. Tens of thousands are missing. Only in the past week, Israeli strikes resulted in the deaths of nearly 100 civilians. There is no justification, and there can be no justification for this, nor is there a justification for the 11 September attack targeting UNRWA school in the Nusayrat refugee camp, which claimed the lives of 18 people, including women and children. The dead include 6 UNRWA staff members. Today, the schools and camps again have been struck. More than 10 people have died again. Beyond the immediate danger of military operations, UN personnel are enduring pressure from the West Jerusalem authorities in various formats. There are frequent detentions, interrogations, movement restrictions, and an information campaign which has been unleashed against UN personnel. Not only does this imperil their lives, but it also threatens the safety of those people who help them. Increasingly, the Israeli side has been targeting violence against UN humanitarian personnel. Last month, Israeli soldiers shelled a World Food Program vehicle, a vehicle that was clearly marked as a WFP. The program had to suspend its operations in the Strip for a period of several days. In early September, there was another incident. A Tzahal heavy equipment rammed into a UN humanitarian convoy. The troops threatened UN personnel with weapons and brought them to be interrogated. And this occurred despite the fact that humanitarian missions were coordinated in advance with Israel. And this once again shows that neither deconfliction nor the notorious system of notifications are working. We regret that our Security Council colleagues, with a rare exception, are unable to summon the courage to talk about this. The Western parties are particularly hypocritical. They play mute when there's a need to provide a frank assessment about what is transpiring with the Palestinians. For if we were talking about any other state, they would vociferously condemn such attacks. And today, on the eve of 7 October commemoration, instead of discussing the situation in the Strip during high-level week, our Western colleagues are zealously engaged in the PR for the Ukrainian president who has overstayed his term. I hope you understand how hypocritical your words will sound today under such circumstances. Mr. President, given the active military operations and the permanent pressure from the West Jerusalem authorities, humanitarian personnel find it difficult to deliver humanitarian assistance, the entry of which remains a separate problem. All of the information from humanitarian structures show that there is an absence of any meaningful progress in this regard. The most important artery for the delivery of cargo has been closed. The initiative to establish a sea corridor, the Cyprus floating dock, collapsed. Humanitarian workers unanimously speak about the woeful shortage of food, fuel, medicines, but they also talk about the obstacles created by Israel and the frequent denials for the conduct of humanitarian operations. For example, in August, according to UN data, the number of denials doubled as compared to July. Clearly, the routes opened today from Jordan, Egypt, and Israel do not allow for the necessary volumes of humanitarian assistance to be provided for. Essentially, today, the average daily threshold and capability is now 70 goods, whereas prior to the crisis, 70 trucks rather, whereas prior to the crisis in Gaza, approximately 500 trucks traveled through there each day. The figures speak for themselves. If this situation continues, then these developments may result in the cessation of UN operations in Gaza. And in this case, more than 2 million Palestinians will face death. This is not a figure of speech. This is a real prospect, and we cannot allow this to happen. The Council has an obligation to do everything possible to prevent this from happening, and part of the Israeli establishment has clearly demonstrated an interest specifically in this happening. The UN Security Council has the necessary tools for this. What is lacking is the political will in the US and their satellites. Essentially, everything that the United Nations, all that the UN can credit itself with is the ongoing campaign to vaccinate children from polio. We hope that the humanitarian pauses for vaccinations will function. At the same time, there's no point today in emphasizing these efforts because the polio situation is but one of the multitude of problems that the population of the Strip continues to encounter. Under the circumstances of the complete devastation of the sanitation and health system in the Strip, at any point there can be an outbreak of other communicable diseases. In Gaza, the regular vaccines have virtually been depleted. These are vaccines for tuberculosis or immunization from diphtheria, tetanus, and whooping cough. These have been depleted. The patients with grave chronic diseases have critical shortages of such medicines as insulin, and these patients are doomed. The need to deliver basic medicines to Gaza is something which needs to be urgently addressed, and Israel, as far as we can understand, as far as we can see, is not amenable to ameliorating the situation. Mr. President, let us not mislead anybody. Given the ongoing military operation of Israel, which has been ongoing for more than 11 months, where the U.S. is a sponsor, the adequate delivery of assistance to the population of the Strip is simply not possible. Humanitarian workers are powerless. They are defenseless in the face of Israeli strikes, and who continue to inhumanely demand that they die during these strikes, whereas the Security Council for nearly a year has been walking in circles and has been unable to compel the Israeli authorities to end its punishing military machine and to stop it. Let us recall that if the UN Security Council resolution on a ceasefire, which we formally have already, if this is not being enforced, then the members of the Security Council can consider measures to ensure its implementation. For the Security Council has the relevant experience, leverage, and means, including in the context of a peacekeeping presence in the Middle East. Colleagues, we are all perfectly cognizant of the fact that while intense military operations are underway, it is unrealistic to bank on any significant progress in stabilizing the humanitarian situation on the ground or stepping up humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza. We need to recognize a simple fact. The problem lies not in the presence or the absence of any mechanism for delivery of humanitarian assistance. The problem lies in the absence of conditions for this due to military operations, where the Israelis are not even making any exceptions for schools or hospitals, nor exceptions provided for UN humanitarian convoys. For this reason, regardless of what is said in this chamber about humanitarian operations, the paramount objective remains to ensure the immediate and comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza. Only here, this time, we need to talk not about empty words, such as Resolution 2735, which was not viable even when it was adopted. And we talked about this on a number of occasions, but we need to focus on a real, explicit demand from the Security Council. Only after this will it be possible to seriously discuss resolving the issues related to delivering humanitarian assistance to civilians. And now, as for the calls which we heard to focus on the question of rebuilding the Strip, of course, this is exceedingly important. However, this is something which is for the long term. Before we talk about the day after tomorrow, we need to understand what tomorrow will look like. And we need to give an assessment of today rather than shamefully sweeping the facts which we have at our disposal under the rug. What will remain of Gaza if the Israeli military operation continues at the current pace? And what will happen with the remaining Israeli hostages? Their fate is of no concern whatsoever to the Israeli authorities, and they have already taken the decision to sacrifice the majority of them. And this is unfortunately what we are seeing, and we hope that the membership of the Security Council will perceive will have a feeling of collective responsibility for developments in the Strip, and that we will together immediately develop the necessary measures to de-escalate and ensure that they are enforced. For now, unfortunately, we do not see this happening, and we continue to hear empty and hypocritical calls in this chamber. Thank you for your attention.